Welcome into Sportsmemo's betting podcast for Monday, March 18th, the day after Selection Sunday. We got Robbie Veno in here. We're breaking down the brackets from a Vegas perspective and going over which is the strongest and which is, some of these location issues, Robbie, and how they'll affect teams, also injuries. But without further ado, welcome into the podcast. How are you doing today?
I am doing great today, Drew. Obviously a busy night for all of us that get involved in this as heavily as we do. Last night, long night, 4 tournaments selected. So you get all the way down to the CIT. You're waiting for those selections to come out. Extra coffee, extra energy, however it is that you fuel yourself to stay awake a few extra hours. That's what we do nowadays at this time of season. And certainly, the lines came up a little bit earlier than I expected last night, Drew, or earlier than in years past. Kudos to odds makers for getting them up so quickly. And we saw some games hit right off the bat, some for specific reasons, some for whatever reasons that the sharps hit them for. But a lot to go over today in a general sense. We won't get involved game by game yet till later in the week, but there's certainly enough to talk about where this NCAA tournament is concerned.
Absolutely, Robbie. And we got the East, West, Midwest, South here. 3 number ones coming from the ACC conference, and then Gonzaga as well. Robbie, which one do you think is the strongest as far as the sub-brackets go?
I think the committee, Drew, did a real good job of dispersing these teams strength-wise. As everybody knows who listens to this show, I keep power ratings on all 351 D1 teams. And when I broke down the regions last night, put all the teams into their place, believe it or not, the Midwest and the West grade out. And let me preface that by saying in the West, you have an 11 versus an 11 and a 16 versus 16 play-in game, as you do in the East. So they have a couple extra teams in their particular brackets, which, because there's 16s in there, it drags the overall power rating down a little bit by having an extra lower-rated team in there. So what I do to make it fair is I just take the underdogs in each of the play-in games from the West and the East and eliminate them and see what the power rating for the entire region will be when they get to 16 rather than at 18. If you do it that way, Drew, with my numbers, the Midwest and the West come out the strongest with exactly the same average power rating per team. The number system I use different than others, but I will tell you that each of those 2 regions came out with 16-team fields with a power rating of 53.03, exactly even for Midwest and West, followed by the South with a 16-team power rating average of 53.0. So you're talking about 3 hundredths separating 3 regions. The East grades out as the lowest power rated region, 52.06. So you can see they're all within a point of each other. I don't remember a year where the tournament committee has, as I said, dispersed the strength of these teams so well, so evenly across the 4 regions. So, congratulations to them. I think from that perspective, who's got the strongest bracket, who's got the easiest course, all these questions that you hear immediately after the tournament is picked. I would say it's almost dead even anywhere you look. I'll say this for Duke, the team, the number 1 seed in the East, which I just said was very, very slightly the lowest power rated region. And things got a little more difficult for them with an announcement overnight this morning that Virginia Tech point guard Justin Robinson is back in the fold for Va Tech. So what looked like might have been an easy path for Duke all of a sudden became a heck of a lot tougher with Robinson being added back to the Virginia Tech team.
Yeah, it's interesting. You bring up a lot of points there, Robbie, as far as your power ratings go. I'll tell you this, and this is just off of how I view it, and I guess my power ratings and the path that I would least want to have and most want to have for the top seeds. I think the West, with Gonzaga and Michigan as the 1 and 2 seeds, are the weakest pair of top seeds out of any of the top 4. And I would go towards the East, which I believe you said you had the lowest in terms of all the teams power rated.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say Michigan State and Duke, number 1 and number 2, are the 2 strongest. I think you can make the argument for the Midwest having UNC and Kentucky as 1-2. But just in my opinion, I think Duke, coming on, getting healthier, and Michigan State, I mean, we saw what they were able to do in the Big Ten tournament in the point guard play with Cassius Winston. Those are the 1-2 that I would choose. So it's interesting to see, and I know your power ratings are taken in all 16 teams, which, that changes things up because they also, the West has Texas Tech, who I think Texas Tech might come out of this West division as the number 3 seed. You got anything on the Red Raiders in the West?
Yeah, and the point you're making, Drew, is another good case. Which region is top heavy? Maybe it's more difficult to get through. I think that I just talked about Justin Robinson being added back to the Virginia Tech lineup after missing, some 9-10 games. And let's also consider the fact that LSU got a big break over the weekend with Javonte Smart being allowed to play despite the scandal that goes on with head coach Will Wade. So we've got some teams here, 1 through 4, in these regions where you can make a lot of cases. And you're probably splitting hairs in most of those arguments. I think everybody with an educated opinion could come up with a good argument for a lot of the sides like we're doing right here. So once again, it just comes down to who can execute for 6 games the best. And I know that where Duke is concerned, the 3-point shooting comes into question. Can they shoot it good enough from 3 for 6 straight games? They shoot great from 3-point range every game, but will there be one game where, let's say, they dip to 20% or lower from 3 and it costs them a Sweet 16 matchup or any matchup? So when you really pick them all apart, I think we find that even the top teams all have their weakness in one shape or form, and it just makes for what I think this year, Drew, is a real exciting tournament. And when you talk about Texas Tech, I wouldn't be surprised as well. They have the star player. They play defense. Chris Beard, an excellent head coach. They make free throws. All the things you would want in a team coming down the stretch in a close game, which inevitably in this tournament you play your share of close games. Can you get into a half-court set and find a 2-point basket? Texas Tech almost checks every single box. So, again, lots of arguments for lots of teams, lots of arguments for each region. Now we just get down to individual games and see who can survive and advance, as Jim Valvano used to say.
Robbie, give me a double-digit seeded team you think has the best chance to make the Sweet 16.
Wow, a double-digit seeded team. Well, you and I talked an awful lot the past couple of weeks about where Wofford would land, and we were right. They're not a double-digit seed. They landed as a 7, so they're out of that discussion. I would think that, there's a lot of – all 4 10s are power conference teams, but I don't think that they're quite good enough to go through and get to a – Final 4, or you said Sweet 16. Boy, Drew, I'll tell you what. I would probably say off the top of my head, and I'm looking at them as we talk here. That's why I'm kind of clamoring for time because I didn't really have a good – well, I think the best – probably the best one would be Oregon, right? They're sitting as a 12 seed, and the way they're playing right now is amazing. They're certainly the best team out of the Pac-12 right now, and whenever can we remember – the best team in a power conference being a double-digit seed. So I think that as I go through it, Oregon would be an obvious answer. Certainly they have a great location. They play their opening couple rounds in San Jose, which favors them. So, if I had to start the list, I would start right there with Oregon.
Yeah, that's not a bad one. And also another team I'd throw out there is UC Irvine, and they're in the subsector with Oregon. And part of why I like your Oregon choice is, they're hot coming down the stretch, winning the Pac-12 tournament, but also that 5-4 there with Wisconsin being the 5 seed and Kansas State being the 4 seed in the South. the little subsector there, these four teams, I kind of think that's a little weak 4-5 there with Kansas State, Wisconsin, depending on Dean Wade and everything. And UC Irvine, I think, got as good a shot as a 13 seed can have against Kansas State, and also your 12-5 there with Oregon over Wisconsin. I don't think it's out of the question to have a UC Irvine-Oregon 12-13 matchup in the round of 32. Robbie, let's go over some location issues. Which ones might be helping teams, like you just said, the Oregon playing in or Oregon playing in San Jose. Also, what other travel spots here do you think could be troublesome for some teams?
Well, I think the worst spot of all would go to St. Mary's. St. Mary's plays Villanova. Now, I live in southeastern Pennsylvania, and I have family in Hartford, Connecticut. I know what the drive is. The drive from here, approximately 3.5 hours. Okay, so for Villanova, it's a 3.5-hour car ride. For St. Mary's, it's crossing 3 time zones. It's got to be the worst. It's always worse going west to east. We know that from football, all the talk of, and the general theory that people bet west coming east playing the 1 o'clock start. For St. Mary's, this isn't a 1 o'clock start. It's a 7:20 on opening night, Thursday night, but they didn't even get the benefit, Drew, of playing Friday. Play Thursday, which means your practice schedule gets shortened up, your travel, because it's so far, occurs a little bit earlier. So I think St. Mary's and Villanova, on the negative side for St. Mary's and on the positive side for Villanova, that's probably your biggest travel spot or situational angle in the first two days. But there's some other ones. I think the location, and for those who want to go check it out, my free play write-up for the first round of the tourney was on the Vermont-Florida State game. And I think location helps there. Hartford, Connecticut for Vermont. Again, not that difficult a car ride from Vermont to Hartford, Connecticut, which is closer to Massachusetts than it is New York. So you can certainly give Vermont an edge for location in that spot. I think travel-wise, there's a few that we've seen talked about already, but certainly Northeastern having to go from Massachusetts to Salt Lake City, that's not an easy one. I think there's a couple in that San Jose region. What you try and do when you're looking for these, Drew, is you try and look for the drastic time zones. Hartford, I just discussed being one, about as far east as you can go. And the other direction, it would be San Jose, which we've already dipped into that region a little bit. But for Oregon, they're not far. It's a pretty good location for them. Wisconsin has to travel a couple of time zones. And for, like you mentioned, Cal Irvine playing Kansas State, probably halfway decent for their fan base, although anybody who's done it, riding up the coast from Southern California to Northern California and into San Jose, it's not the easiest, but still a car ride rather than plane ride, you can make it. So I think those are tough. Liberty and Virginia Tech in that region both come from Eastern time zone all the way out west. So again, those two teams will cross 3 time zones. They, however, have the benefit of a Friday rather than a Thursday, so it might not be quite as bad. Overall, the St. Mary's Villanova situation certainly is the most favorable for one side, that side being Villanova.
Okay, so you brought up a lot of good location issues there with some of these teams. And which one was the Northeastern one you said?
Northeastern has to go to Salt Lake City, coming from Boston, Massachusetts. So that's it's not quite the full 3 time zones, but it's a Thursday game. So you do cut your work week short a little bit because travel has to occur earlier, and it's a longer ride for them as opposed to KU, which doesn't have to go very far at all, really. Midwest to Salt Lake, it's much easier for them than it is for Northeastern. I think also going out to Salt Lake, you have Syracuse from upstate New York, which is, again, a Thursday game. Pretty long travel. Their opponent is Baylor. Travel not so bad, not as bad. So, there's a lot of little intricacies in here. And the Thursday-Friday thing makes a difference. I mean, it certainly does cut short your practice time if you have to go a few thousand miles and be there for a Thursday game. In the case of Northeastern, that start in the Utah time zone will be 2:00 Mountain Time in the afternoon. So for Northeastern, like I say, probably a little bit of a difficult travel spot.
Robbie, this is great stuff, man. Did you hear this somewhere? Or you did all this research by yourself?
I did this work, so if you hear it somewhere else, they're listening to us.
I was just going to say, man, this is great. Usually when we're done with the podcast, it takes me like 10 or 15 minutes to get this one up. Just fair warning, this might take me about 25 or 30 minutes, man. I think I'm going to go in and bet some of this stuff before we release the podcast, Robbie. This is great.
There
man.
you go.
All right, we got injuries. What injuries you want to throw out there as far as things you're thinking might shift the market here?
Well, I know that Justin Robinson returned to the lineup, like I say, which was announced real early this morning. That's huge, Drew, and it showed up in the line, right? Virginia Tech got bet the other way last night. That game got bet from an opener of 10 down to 9.5, and it's come right back to 10.5 now upon announcement that Robinson is going to play. So for Virginia Tech, sure, they have somewhat of a travel concern. Like I say, they're going across 3 time zones. They'll get the 3 hours back because it's east to west, and they do play on Friday, which is somewhat of a benefit. But they do have travel working a little bit against them. But, boy, Justin Robinson, absolutely huge. And, it's a big day, I guess, for Virginia point guards because VCU point guard Maurice Evans, who got hurt in the A-10 tourney and was on crutches on the sidelines after the injury, he's going to be able to play Friday against UCF. I mean, without Evans, UCF is a play. UCF certainly would have gotten bet. Instead, we see money going the other way towards the VCU side, knowing that Evans is going to play in that game. Very important. Dean Wade, you brought his name up earlier. Dean Wade, apparently, doctor's appointment today. They're going to see how much progress he's made. Bruce Weber's holding out hope. I don't know how much we could count on Dean Wade, but that may be a game. And I know everybody – I shouldn't say everybody. I don't want to blanket statement things, but there are a ton of people that ran right away to play Cal Irvine, a team you brought up earlier, in this particular contest. If that line gets cheap enough and all of a sudden Wade plays, we'll probably see a lot of take back the other side. I'll tell you this, Drew, from a power ratings perspective, that game did have the biggest gap. I thought odds makers overplayed their hand a little bit by making Cal Irvine such a short dog. I understand it's a great team. It's a 30-win team, and the display they put on in the championship game the other night where everything they threw up went in against Cal State Fullerton was amazing. And their head coach, Russell Turner, proclaimed about 7-10 days ago that he has the best team on the West Coast. I don't doubt the fact that he could have maybe gone into the Pac-12 and potentially won it this year. But I made Kansas State an 8-point favorite on a neutral floor in this game, and they came extremely cheap according to that number. Only 5.5. Now we see 5s, 4.5. So a lot of Irvine money. It's a popular team with the national media from last night through today. Perhaps you'll see more Irvine money. This Dean Wade thing, his injury status is going to be interesting. If you're willing to gamble, truly gamble, and say, man, I think Wade is going to give him 10 minutes on Friday, then probably going to catch a good number at this point, especially if they announce that Wade's able to go on Friday, because I know there'll be take back if that's the case.
Yeah, I wonder if the odds makers and really the market in general is just getting a little bit too cute with this UC Irvine team. When it first came out, I had them pegged as a team I wanted to bet. But you're right, Robbie. Right. This number, I wonder if they're getting a little too cute. It's becoming that kind of quote-unquote trendy underdog out there. So you always got to keep that in mind. Robbie, anything else? I mean, this has been great, man. A lot of good tidbits, betting tidbits going into filling out your bracket to making your first-round bets, whatever it may be. Anything else you want to throw out before we shut this down?
Yeah, let's just expand on what you just mentioned there a little bit, Drew. Trendy underdogs, trendy mid-majors. We saw it all across the board last night. Analysts, television analysts, telling you that Liberty's going to the Sweet 16, telling you all kinds of things, which lead to pile on from public bettors. We watch these teams all season long. And we know they're all good teams. I can tell you right now, New Mexico State's a really good team. I can tell you right now, Liberty's a really good team. Calherine's a really good team. But in our case, we're playing against a certain number, and sometimes the bandwagon gets a little too big to go with what we know are good sides. There are some less publicized teams out of mid-majors that are – the mid-majors are so good nowadays, Drew. You can't sell any of them short. Years gone by, the gap between a 2 and a 15 was monstrous. Nowadays, the gap between a 2 and 15 is no such thing. They're relatively tight. That's why you don't see, in older days, you would have saw 28-point numbers commonplace between 1s and 16s first round. You don't see that much anymore. But let me just put a couple of teams out there. Number one, everybody's going to talk about Murray State and John Morant, right? They've been talking about them all season long. Good team, very good team. But it's almost discrediting Marquette and Marcus Howard to have so much talk about Murray State. I don't know that they're, within 4.5 points of Marquette overall. On any given day, they could be something to watch out for. I wrote up the Vermont side. Vermont's one of these mid-majors that you haven't heard a peep about. But they're as good as any of those other mid-majors, and they're in a favorable spot. So certainly they'd be one to look at. Northeastern has a travel issue, which we documented earlier in the pod. Without that travel issue, against KU, and we still see money coming in on Northeastern. Bill Cohen's team, very, very good, very veteran, one to look out for. If Iona had a better matchup, I probably would have looked at them, but you can't play Greyhound style and draw North Carolina. That's just the worst draw you could have possibly had. So there's a bunch of these teams out there. Northern Kentucky, nobody talks about. They faced the Texas Tech team that you mentioned earlier in the show. So it just, like you say, sometimes I think they get a little too cute with a select few of these teams that are mid-majors. Belmont got a lot of coverage. I happen to love Belmont, close to the university, because my son graduated there, so I follow it close. But, they're a 3.5-point favorite now over Temple. You're not getting any bargains with some of these mid-majors, believe me. As much as you want to pound the table for them, when it comes to betting them, sometimes you have to draw your hand back and say, well, I'm just not getting what I should be getting here.
Yeah, good stuff, Robbie. And yeah, you got to check yourself going into this. Guys, if you're listening to this on Monday, it's $9 Monday. Check out sportsmemo.com. All plays discounted to just $9. And if you're listening to it on Tuesday, we got $2 Tuesday top play on the board available for just $2. So great days to check out the website. Robbie, thanks for the time, man. We'll definitely have you on here in the next couple days on the podcast breaking down college basketball. Check out Robbie Veno's service. We got a coupon code for Robbie Veno, CBB69. We'll give you his 7-day all access for just $69. You can do it for myself as well, Drew Martin, for my 7-day all access service. It's CBB69 at checkout. That's 7 days all access for just $69. CBB69 at checkout. Thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll be back tomorrow talking more sports betting action.